Hey everyone, welcome to English 2010. Today I'm going to introduce to you the letter writing unit. This is the first of 3 units, and so let's get going. The first question you might be asking is, we're in a college class, why are we learning how to write letters? This video is to explain why. I don't believe that letters by themselves are the most important thing you can learn. But I do believe that the lessons learned along the way as we talk about letter writing are so important. So I designed this unit actually with those principles in mind, and letter writing became the vehicle for those principles and ideas. So all along the way, remember that letter writing isn't really the point. The point are these principles. These principles should come first. Okay, so why letter writing? Number 1, letters show us that all writing is a part of a conversation. What do I mean by that? Anytime you write anything at all, you are participating in a conversation. Let's think about that. When you write a letter, you know that you're writing to a person. That's obvious, right? Okay, what about an essay? Who's your audience then? That's also obvious. It's a teacher. Now, some of you might be saying, well, Mr. Gunther, when I write notes to myself, I don't really have an audience. I just jotted something down. You do have an audience. Why did I write these notes down? Because I thought that future Scott might forget it. If you write a shopping list, you're writing to the future version of you. Does that make sense? Now, when writing fails, for a variety of reasons, because you got a bad grade, but usually when writing fails, it's because the message wasn't communicated. That's what it means when writing fails. So when writing fails, it happens for one reason and one reason only. There could be different varieties that come from that, different symptoms, but the cause is always the same. So listen up. When writing fails, it fails for one simple reason, because the author lost sight of the audience. For whatever reason, the author got distracted or forgot that they were writing to a specific audience. We all have experiences with this in our own lives. Getting a bad grade on an essay is one thing, and we know that we failed because we forgot who our audience was, the teacher, and we forgot our audience has this thing called a rubric that they're going to use to grade your essay, right? And that rubric is part of the audience. So when you fail, it's because you weren't keeping track of what your audience needed, okay? Now, this happens in all kinds of writing. Have you ever written a note to yourself and you have no idea what it meant? That is an example of failed writing. Like if you just wrote the word apple on a piece of paper, you might find it later and think, what the heck was I even talking about here? Do I mean Apple computers? Do I mean apples like as in I eat them? And so the person who wrote that note, the version of you in the past who wrote that note, assumed that the future person would remember the whole context and everything, but you didn't, okay? So anytime writing fails, it's because the author loses track of the audience. To explain these ideas for you, I'm going to draw a triangle, because I know teenagers love triangles, right? Okay, I'm going to write the word author here. I'm going to write the word audience here. When you write something, you are the author trying to communicate something to the audience, right? And the audience has certain expectations they have from you. So it goes back and forth. You're writing to future you, and that person who's reading the note or the letter or whoever, they have certain expectations for what you should say. So if I write shopping list on the top of a piece of paper and then I write apples, right? The person who's reading that note can say, oh, because it's a shopping list, I can assume it's going to be apple, the fruit, okay? The thing that you write is called a text. No matter if it is a letter or something else, it is a text. These are all 3 different real things, meaning all 3 of these things exist in the real world. The author is a person. The audience is usually a person, although I guess you could say it's a computer sometimes too. Can I draw a computer? That is a laptop. Hey, that's pretty good, okay? And the text is usually a physical thing too, right? Those are all 3 real things. And now I'm going to talk about like the most important thing that I can talk about today. So please, if you're going to learn one thing from this course, learn this. Context. What is context? Context is everything surrounding something that gives it meaning and definition. So when I am writing this note, I have a certain context. I'm looking into the fridge, I'm in my kitchen, I am looking under the sink to see if we have cleaning supplies. That's my context. It might be shopping day. That's part of my context. The audience, they have a context too. Their context is, well, let's put the kitchen here. Their audience, their context is the store. And they're surrounded by all sorts of things, right? So when you're in your kitchen, you think that you're going to remember everything on your shopping list because you see it right there. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I don't need to write that down. But when you get to the store, you have a whole new context, a whole new stimuli that is completely different from that context, right? And then the text itself, that context will shift, right? Is that going with you to the store or is it here with you at home? So that is like the most important thing I can teach you today, is that context is king. And that as you're writing a letter, or if you're writing an essay, you need to be very, very aware of your own context as the author and of the audience's context. And you need to be very, very aware, not just very aware, very, very aware that your contexts are different, that your context is different from the author's context. You need to be aware of that because that manages expectations. Now that sounds all really complex and philosophical, and that's why we're doing it with letter writing. Because when you're writing a letter to someone, it seems very simple and trivial, but it's a very easy way to practice being aware of your own context and being aware of the audience's context. So another reason we're doing this letter writing unit is it's kind of my tricky way of getting you to practice this concept over and over again without having to write a bunch of essays. So in another English 2010 class, you might just write a bunch of essays. In this class, you're going to write a bunch of letters, and it's going to feel easier because it's letters, but in practice, you're doing the same thing. You're practicing this idea of being aware of context, being aware of audience at every step of the way. Okay, let's look at some examples. Okay, let's look at some examples. These examples are available in the modules and the assignments for today. And the ones I'm looking at right now are personal letter examples. This is a letter that Conan O'Brien wrote in 2003 to a girl named Nikki Simmons, and he is responding to her. We do not have the letter that Nikki wrote. We only have the letter, we don't have the letter that Nikki wrote. We only have the letter that Conan wrote in response. Here's his original text, and here is like the typed version. So follow along. In this letter, in fact, in all these letters that we have here, all good letters, all good writing follows a certain pattern. Let me say that again. All good writing follows a certain pattern. Not only is all good writing aware of audience and context, it does this by following a universal pattern that I discovered as I was teaching letter writing like 5 years ago. And we're going to find that pattern here in these letters. So this is a letter written in 2003 from Conan O'Brien to a fan. Right here on the side, you'll see the handwritten version, and over here, you'll see the typed version, just so to make it easier to read. So follow along. And as we read this, we're going to discover the universal pattern. Thanks, Nikki, for your very flattering offer. It's great to know I have such a devoted fan out there, and I'm sure you'd make a great prom date. I didn't go to mine. It's a very sad story. Unfortunately, I got married recently, and my wife doesn't allow me to go to proms anymore with cute 16-year-old girls. Still, it was very cool of you to ask me. Thanks, and have a great evening. Now, this is just one letter, but this pattern is going to be in every good letter that you will ever read. This is true. Find me a good letter and send it to me, and I will show you that this pattern exists. What's the pattern? Here it is. 1. All good letters start off by referencing the context. Here, the context is, thanks for your offer, and in case you forgot what that offer is, I can't go to prom with you anymore, right? So the first thing the author does is say, here is the context. This is so important. If you're writing a shopping list, the word shopping list at the top sets up the context. If it doesn't say shopping list, and if it just says apples and walnuts, it could be a recipe. It could be a secret code. You don't know the context for it. Does that make sense? And this goes on to bigger writing as well. Anything from a simple shopping list to a letter to a friend to a big complex dissertation for your PhD. Every successful piece of writing will follow this pattern by beginning with setting up the context. Now, what would happen if you didn't do this in a letter? You would end up saying something like, "I'm sorry, I can't go." You ever get like a text message from a friend and you have no idea what they're talking about, right? Well, luckily in text messages, we can go back and read the rest of the thread, but sometimes maybe a DM or something, you don't have the rest of the thread and all it says is sure. And you're like, what the hell are you talking about? Sure what? That's why you always have to say, sure, I was nice to hear about going to the whatever, I'd be happy to go, okay? So number one, context. Set it up. Then the letter does just what it's supposed to do, which is the main idea, which is saying, sorry, I can't go with you. Now, this letter's a little short, but it still does the third step, which is point to the future. First thing, here's the context. Second thing, here's my point. Third thing, what's going to happen in the future? Does he do that here? Yes. Thanks, and have a great evening. Now, if he wanted to hear back from her, he would say something like, thanks, I can't wait to hear how it goes, right? And sometimes the future thing is a bigger part of your essay, sometimes it's a shorter part. But in the end, all good writing follows this pattern, and I want you to, I don't know, write it down and get it tattooed on your brain. That's a good idea. Get a tattoo on your brain of this pattern. The all good writing follows. 1, context. 2, idea. 3, future. All good writing follows this pattern. First part of all good writing does this. Second part of all good writing does this. Third part of all good writing does this. And depending on the kind of writing, this could be big or little, the context. Or depending on the kind of writing, this could be big or little, depending on what you're saying. Does that make sense? Okay. That is so important. Remember, context is king. As you're writing your letters, be very, very aware of this pattern. As I'm grading your letters, I'm grading it on the structure. Are you following this pattern of context, idea, future? Okay? And as you look at the other letters for the other assignments, you will see this pattern. And as you think about it, every kind of writing that you ever come across or do will follow this pattern. And that's why we're starting with the letter writing unit, is it's a simple, memorable way to teach this concept in a way that gives you lots of practice. Okay? So that is what I have for you. Please let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns.